He could have easily prioritized his career. All it took was signing a single safety clearance, a quick rubber stamp for a hazardous assembly line he knew would kill someone. He flatly refused. 11 days later, his best friend was killed on that very line. 3 weeks later, Holt left Vance Industries with a cardboard box, 0 severance, and 1 completely unexpected phone call. 3 helpless orphaned girls whom society had already completely abandoned. He opened his doors, choosing to raise them entirely alone. Let me show you how this act of love transformed these 3 forgotten girls into future corporate leaders. Back then, his kitchen on Linden Street was bone-chillingly cold, and it had nothing to do with the freezing winter outside. Holt sat alone at his kitchen table during the cold second week of November 2004, counting and recounting the exact same miserable stack of bills he had stared at yesterday. $1,847. That represented his entire net worth in the world. Rent was due in 11 days, and his landlord wanted $420. His wall phone rang exactly twice before he finally picked it up. Margaret Hensley was on the other end, calling from Hartwell County Family Services. She spoke with that careful, heavy tone we use right before asking someone for an impossible miracle. She explained that his name was listed as the main emergency contact in Daniel Cole's folder. Daniel's 3 young daughters were waiting like abandoned assets inside the cold county shelter, and she desperately needed to know if he could step in and help. Holt closed his eyes. Daniel had been buried for only 8 days. His wife, Anna, had lost her battle with cancer 6 months before that. There were absolutely no grandparents left. An aunt down in Florida had rejected them over the phone without even pausing to breathe. Holt promised he would be there in 40 minutes. His old truck sputtered as it started. Late November in Hartwell brought dead brown grass and completely worn-out, gray storefronts. The old county building on Maple Street sat behind a neglected lot of cracked asphalt. Margaret Hensley was in her 50s, her reading glasses pushed carelessly back into her hair. She led Holt down a bleak, quiet hallway, stopping outside a door with a tiny window. "Mr. Brennan, I need to be completely honest with you. We found a family in Erie for the baby, and a foster home willing to take the middle girl. The oldest is a real challenge. She will likely stay stuck in the system until she turns 18. 3 entirely different counties. They will likely never see each other again." Then, she slowly pushed open the heavy door. 3 little girls sat huddled on a cheap vinyl sofa under cold, bright lights. 7-year-old Maggie sat in the middle, while 5-year-old Ruth clung tightly to her left. 2-year-old Junie sat on her right, dragging a worn-out toy rabbit by its ear. Maggie held onto her sister's wrists, not squeezing, just keeping them close and protected. She stared straight at Holt when he walked in, no tears, and she did not move. She whispered, "My daddy always said you were the kindest man at the place where he worked." Holt stood there in absolute silence as the weight of the moment washed over him. He signed the temporary custody papers right there at Margaret's wooden desk. Margaret warned him that a judge would review the arrangement in 90 days, demanding proof of a stable income. She did not need to explain the dark future awaiting those girls if he failed. That night at 412 Linden Street, all 3 girls slept peacefully in his single bed. In those quiet moments, a legacy was born. Junie slept safe, her rabbit wedged against Maggie's shoulder. At that kitchen table, Holt sat mapping out a legacy of love on a simple scrap envelope. Margie's Bakery, Henley's Garage, the Route 6 Dairy Farm, the hardware store. I listed my few tools. You and I both know how starting at rock bottom feels. Morning arrived. I laid out 3 small bowls and my 1 cup of coffee. Sweet little Junie still had not figured out how to hold a spoon. But Maggie reached right over and gently fed her baby sister. Fast forward 20 years to a Philadelphia high-rise. That massive boardroom on the 38th floor of Vance Industries had towering glass walls overlooking the Schuylkill River, all the way to the refineries. Their lead attorney, Eleanor Whitford, had been working in that boardroom for 6 days. On paper, this massive buyout seemed completely clean and straightforward. Cole Holdings, a powerful Boston investment group started 8 years ago by my 3 daughters, offered $340 million to buy out Vance Industries completely. The exact same safety gear empire Richard Vance inherited from his father back in 1986. Richard had personally hired Eleanor. She was 41, a top partner at Whitford and Crane. She led their mid-cap mergers. Richard wanted an attorney who would never let him look weak, so he paid her massive retainer fully in advance. My 3 daughters marched in at exactly 9 on a Tuesday morning. Margaret, now the chief executive, claimed the head of the table without hesitation. 27 years old, dark blonde hair, wearing a tailored navy suit. She ran that meeting like she had been commanding boardrooms for 10 years. Ruth, their brilliant chief financial officer, sat beside her with a leather portfolio, never smiling. My sweet youngest Juniper quietly handled the introductions while taking notes. Margaret calmly laid out their transition timeline. 6 weeks to close, complete operational handover, no exceptions whatsoever. She confirmed the buyout was fully funded through their Boston bank. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, the final contract demanded one specific non-financial clause, which her lawyers would deliver within the week. Sitting across the table, Richard Vance demanded to know what kind of clause. Margaret calmly replied, "You will see it when you see it." Let's follow Eleanor to her Market Street office. She opened the Cole Holdings file. She studied the papers for 2 hours, then froze. My 3 girls had legally changed their names at 18, completely dropping a hyphen. Their original birth certificates read Margaret Cole Brennan, Ruth Cole Brennan, and Juniper Cole Brennan. All through high school, their home address was 412 Linden Street, Hartwell, Pennsylvania. The legal guardian listed on every single document filed since 2004. All the way through 2016, that was me, Holt Brennan. Eleanor quickly pulled up the United States Patent and Trademark database in a new tab. She typed in my name and 14 patents popped right up. Every last one covered industrial safety systems, pressure valves, and emergency shutoff protocols. Conveyor line fail-safes. Every single patent had been signed over to Vance Industries upon filing. The earliest filed was 2001. The last was November 4, 2004. After that, there was absolutely nothing. My name simply vanished from every engineering database she could possibly find. She opened a new browser and typed in my name. Right beside Vance Industries in the year. Our legacy had returned. You and I recognize true legacy when we see it, unlike that buried local article. The headline simply read, "Local engineer released after production line incident." 11 short paragraphs with no mention of the chief executive, Daniel Cole. Eleanor printed the page, reading it twice. Then she just sat there, frozen in the quiet silence. She picked up the phone and canceled her dinner. She planned to drive to Hartwell tomorrow, her hand lingering on the keys. The cursor blinked on an empty search for Hartwell, Pennsylvania. On a late October Saturday, she found a one-street town. A few coffee spots and a white church needing fresh paint. A quiet war memorial stood on a patch of grass where roads met. Eleanor parked near the church, checking the address on her screen. 412 Linden was a faded blue house with a covered porch. An old rocking chair sat near yellowing flowers in the autumn chill. The open garage hummed with the sound of someone fixing heavy machinery. She stepped onto the gravel driveway. A man in gray worked on a compressor on a rusted cart. He was lean, with hands shaped by decades of quiet, honest labor. With graying hair, he looked up as her boots crunched the gravel. She introduced herself and named her corporate firm. She was the lawyer representing the firm buying out Cole Holdings. Holt Brennan wiped his greasy hands on a rag, offering no handshake. He quietly muttered that he knew someone would arrive eventually. She asked if he knew his daughters were buying the company that fired him. He quietly admitted he knew, but he never asked them for details. A true father never wants his children living in his shadow. Eleanor scanned his neat, organized garage while he spoke. Tools hung on pegboards with the absolute precision of a laboratory. There was a drill press, wrench racks, and carefully sorted tools. An old blueprint was taped above. "Let's look closer, shall we?" A schematic for a safety system dated October 2004. Across the bottom, a faded stamp read, "Rejected, Holt Brennan." He gently offered to make her some coffee inside. His kitchen was small but spotless. A simple coffee maker, a chipped mug, and a window facing the yard. Nearby, she noticed one framed photo that stood out. It showed Holt and 3 young girls by a quiet lake. The youngest proudly held a tiny fish. No fancy awards or plaques. Nothing showed that this humble father actually held 14 major engineering patents. While pouring coffee, she asked how long he had been restoring broken things. He admitted he started the week they fired him. His very first job was fixing a neighbor's broken heater. She paid him only in food because she had no money. And you know why? Investing in people today builds a legacy that changes tomorrow. He spoke with simple, deeply honest words. Holt had no idea what was waiting inside that final buyout clause. He didn't know the buyout size. An hour ago, he didn't even know her name. When the lawyer asked if his daughters ever mentioned the firm, he simply said they stopped asking about his work years ago. He thought they were just being kind, never realizing his quiet love had built an unstoppable force. Eleanor studied the quiet old man across the table. She noticed his steady hands, the hands of a father whose quiet love had raised a new generation. She stayed silent, remembering 15 years in boardrooms of loud men who had built far less than this father. She drove back down Interstate 76 in absolute silence for 2 hours. Somewhere past Coatesville, she finally spoke aloud to the empty car. Who am I really working for here, and who am I fighting? She still did not have a clear answer. By the time she reached the city, the sun was sinking. The looming Philadelphia skyline in front of her suddenly felt, for the very first time in her career, like she was defending the wrong side. Come with me to the 41st floor of Cole Holdings, overlooking the Delaware. Late afternoon sunlight streamed right through the window, casting a warm golden path straight across the thick office carpet. Margaret Cole sat behind a massive walnut desk, completely empty except for a laptop, a yellow legal pad, and a single framed photo tilted toward the glass. 3 girls in graduation gowns, standing beside a man in a gray jacket, the quiet father whose love shaped their future. Eleanor had asked to meet completely alone. No paralegals, no backup. Margaret agreed without asking a single question. Eleanor sat down and got straight to business. That non-financial clause, I need it now. Margaret did not even blink. She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. 3 typed demands, absolutely no company letterhead. Number 1. Vance Industries will issue a public statement, hosted on the homepage and filed as an official press release, formally clearing the names of all workers wrongfully fired over the past 25 years. Number 2. The name Holt Brennan must be specifically included in this release, including a clear sentence admitting his role in spotting the defect on production line 7 before the November 22, 2004 incident. Number 3. A signed formal apology letter bearing the personal signature of Richard Vance must be delivered right to Holt Brennan's front door. A symbolic $1 settlement will accompany it. Eleanor read those words twice. She set it down. Margaret had not looked away from the window for a second. My adoptive dad never spoke a single word about any of this, Margaret finally said. Her voice stayed steady. I began digging up corporate records during law school. It took 4 solid years. My sisters, Ruth and Junie, did not even know until recently. He has no clue we are doing this, and he won't until the ink is completely dry. Eleanor let the weight of that quiet legacy fill the room. You and I must remember, she was the lead lawyer for the other side. She was protecting Richard Vance. Taking these demands to the meeting would kill the deal instantly, and Richard would have total justification, based on the strict contract she had signed in his office 6 weeks ago, to file a formal complaint and completely ruin her career over a contract breach. Think about that legacy as she rode down 41 floors, never pressing another button. Let's start here. She was looking back at a tragedy from 8 years ago. A welder named David Klein in Reading had refused to sign a faulty safety report. They fired him for standing up, so he turned to her firm. Her firm agreed to take his case on partial contingency. They lost the trial. No internal witnesses dared to testify, and all key documents were completely shredded. 3 months after that crushing verdict, David Klein took his own life in his garage. Eleanor was second chair on that case, and she skipped his funeral entirely. She convinced herself his family wouldn't want a failed lawyer there. She actually believed that lie for a week. She drove straight back to her empty apartment in Rittenhouse. She poured a glass of wine she never drank, then opened her laptop. She pulled up Vance corporate records from 2003 to 2005. looking through OSHA reports, civil filings, and old issues of the Hartwell Register. She typed out a single sentence at the top of an unnamed desktop file in 12-point type. She never titled it and never hit save. It read, "I do not want to be on the wrong side of this one." She stayed awake working until 4 in the morning. The final safety report on the Line 7 incident was dated January 11, 2005. 47 pages long. Eleanor read it twice, scratching notes on a yellow legal pad. The official conclusion was painfully brief. They blamed operator error by Daniel Cole, a loyal technician with 11 years at the plant. The corporate executive signing for Vance was their slick vice president of legal back then. A man named Garrett Vance, Richard's older brother, who later died of a heart attack. To find the Hartwell Register archives, she had to drive to the Main Street Library. The local library had bound volumes going back to 1962. She found the December 4, 2004 issue on a shelf in Section B. Stick with me here. She found an article headlined "Questions Linger on the Plant Incident." The local reporter quoted an unnamed engineer at the plant, who stated that the assembly line design had a massive systemic flaw in the secondary pressure relief assembly. The reporter was Carla Mendez. Eleanor quickly jotted down that name in her notebook. She cross-referenced my old personnel files, which had been entered into the case as evidence. The lead systems engineer assigned to Production Line 7 back in 2004 was indeed me, Holt Brennan. I had filed a formal refusal to sign that safety report on November 11th of that year. Daniel's fatal accident happened on November 22nd, just 11 days after my refusal. She drove to see me in Hartwell that Thursday, carrying the pages in a leather portfolio. The autumn leaves along Linden Street had already turned a beautiful burnt copper. I was washing dirt off my hands at the outdoor spigot when her car pulled up. I had just returned a heavy air compressor to help out at Margie's local bakery. She did not bring those damning papers out right away. We sat together in 2 wicker chairs on my porch before she handed me the folder. I read each page slowly, my mind blank, the way you read a nightmare you've already relived 1,000 times. When I finally finished reading, I handed the folder back to her. She asked why I never sued them. Because of 3 little girls who needed my love, I told her. You see why I had to look at the street, not her. If I took them to court, I would have wasted 10 years fighting. I couldn't afford a good lawyer anyway, so I poured those 10 years into raising my girls instead. He paused. Besides, I never believed some corporate judge would actually side with me. Vance Corporation completely owned this town back then, you know. Silence settled over the porch. A car passed, a distant dog barked, then went quiet. Eleanor watched him pour hot black coffee from an old thermos into faded mugs. These weren't the clean, smooth hands of a brilliant engineer with 14 patents. They were the rough hands of a father who traded a career for a lifetime of love, saving 3 forgotten girls from the system. She gently set her warm coffee mug on the wooden railing. Is anyone from that old Vance executive team still around today? She pressed him, maybe someone in that boardroom who's ready to finally do the right thing. He thought about it. Marlene Hoyt, he murmured, Richard's personal executive secretary back then. She took notes at every single high-level meeting. She must be in her 60s now. Retired a while back. Last I heard, she moved back home to Pittsburgh. Marlene lived in a modest brick house on a quiet street in Bethel Park, just 15 minutes south of Pittsburgh. The front lawn was pristine. A single rocking chair sat near a completely silent wind chime. Eleanor knocked on the front door at exactly 1:30 that Wednesday. The elderly woman who answered had short silver hair and a heavy sweater buttoned to the top. She quietly studied Eleanor's corporate card through the screen door for 10 long seconds. I signed a very strict non-disclosure agreement, Marlene said, 40 pages. I won't break that contract. Then she simply closed the door. Eleanor retreated to her hotel room, lying on the stiff bed for an hour, staring blankly at the ceiling. Stick with me here. Eleanor knew this father's sacrifice deserved justice. She drove right back. By then, a freezing, miserable rain had started sweeping in off the river. She didn't even knock this time. She just stood there in the cold, proving she was fully invested in bringing his truth to light. 40 grueling minutes ticked by as the downpour completely soaked through her heavy winter jacket. Finally, the door creaked open. Get inside before you freeze to death, Marlene muttered. The cozy living room had a brown armchair, a warm knitted blanket on the sofa, and crowded bookshelves. But there were zero family photos anywhere. Marlene quietly poured 2 cups of warm tea, refusing to sit down. I kept a secret copy, she admitted. The minutes from November 23, 2004, the day after the accident. Richard called in the lawyers and ordered them to fire Holt Brennan immediately, and his exact words were to clean up the safety file. I typed up that entire document myself. I secretly ran a duplicate copy and snuck it home in my bag. I kept it for one reason. If the company ever targeted me, I needed some real leverage. Together, we are about to see a father's love pay off. Moments later, she brought out a sealed envelope. She set it on the table. There is much more in here than just those meeting minutes. She broke the seal. Inside lay 2 crucial documents. The first was the corporate meeting record. 4 type pages, personally signed at the bottom by Marlene Holt. The second was a yellow legal sheet, written in blue ink, dated November 8, 2004. A formal resignation letter sent to Vance Industries, signed by the loving father Daniel Cole. The document was 3 short paragraphs. It detailed the exact technical failure. Let us examine the truth. A catastrophic failure on production line 7. This paper proved Daniel warned managers twice and legal once about the danger. They chose to ignore his pleas. It proved he had intended to resign immediately if they refused to stop that deadly production line. Yet that crucial warning was buried before ever reaching the engineers. Richard Vance stole it directly from the mail, ensuring Daniel's official record remained completely blank. Now Eleanor held that very page. The paper felt frail and ancient. I am 64 years old, Marlene admitted. I am not doing this for money. I refuse to die while keeping this terrible secret hidden in my home. Those 3 forgotten orphan girls deserved a future built on truth. Silence was a sin. Eleanor carefully tucked the evidence away and drove east into the pouring rain. Waiting at a dreary gas station in Carlisle, she called Margaret Cole directly. She simply said, "I have exactly what you need, emergency morning meeting." Meanwhile in Hartwell, Holt Brennan worked his magic in his garage, fixing a broken appliance that Mrs. Henley down the street had entirely given up hope on. His radio hummed. Holt had no idea the discarded girls he loved were now changing history. Up on the 40th floor, Vance Industries had reserved their grand boardroom for the acquisition weeks ago. The caterers arranged expensive pastries along the far back wall of the room. But nobody ate anything. Vance brought his powerful allies, Richard, 7 board members, and 4 corporate lawyers. Facing them were Margaret, Ruth, and Juniper, the powerful legacy of Holt's love, with Eleanor sitting nearby, guarding her Heva folder. Margaret calmly presented their non-financial demands. That single sheet of paper traveled slowly from hand to hand. Richard read it quickly, tossed it down, and let out a cold, mocking laugh. "This is a business acquisition, Miss Cole, not some bleeding heart charity project. Remove this absurd clause immediately, or you walk away from this entire deal. I honestly do not care either way." Then Eleanor stood up, preparing to speak. She quietly announced her immediate resignation as the head attorney for Vance Industries, stepping down because she uncovered a massive conflict of interest that fell directly into her hands during the critical final stages of their corporate due diligence. "Stay with me here." She dropped that crucial envelope on the table. Richard turned pale. "This is a serious legal breach, and your firm will pay dearly for it." But the independent board chair, a sharp 68-year-old named Catherine Lowell, raised her hand. "Richard, shut your mouth." Catherine slowly unsealed the envelope. She carefully studied the first page, then turned to the second. She pushed those incriminating meeting files over to the director sitting on her left, while handing Daniel's letter to the man on her right. Absolute silence filled the boardroom, broken only by the quiet rustle of paper. Vance's 4 corporate lawyers exchanged panicked glances without uttering a single word. Margaret stood proud, ready to honor the legacy of her true father, Daniel J. Cole. Then she read his final resignation letter, word for word, line by line. Her voice remained perfectly clear and steady, never wavering or changing in volume. Finishing the final sentence, she set the paper down but stood her ground, refusing to sit. "You and I recognize a reckoning when we see one." Richard lunged toward his counsel as 2 directors stood up. The most senior member was Howard Renz, a fierce former federal judge. The corporate buyout was abruptly halted, pending a deep investigation under Article 9. This massive deal wasn't put on hold just because Cole walked away, but because Vance lost his legal power to sell during this hostile takeover inquiry. You and I are witnessing the ultimate payoff. The four attorneys sat silent, making no objections. One of them, the youngest lawyer there. He quietly slid his meeting agenda right into his briefcase and zipped it shut. Catherine Lowell looked at Richard and said, "You are asked to leave this room." Richard froze in shock. Then he slowly gathered his files and stood up. He couldn't look at the three once unwanted girls who now held his entire fate. Juniper had stayed completely quiet through the entire corporate meeting. She stood up from her chair and walked down the long table, and placed a small photograph face up directly in front of Richard. A faded photograph of three cast-off little girls in red coats glowing with warmth, and a younger Holt Brennan standing in his old Hartwell garage back in the winter of 2004. Juniper did not say a single word. She stared at Richard for one long second, then turned and walked back to her sisters. Richard stared down at that old family photo. He didn't pick it up, and he definitely didn't move it anywhere else. He only paused beside it for a moment before walking straight out of the room. Eleanor stood at the table's end, her hands resting heavily on the empty envelope. Margaret caught her eye and gave her the tiniest nod of reassurance. The Philadelphia Inquirer printed the massive story on the front page Monday morning. Vance Industries acquisition halted by 20-year-old whistleblower documents. The story quoted the meeting minutes word for word, including the full resignation letter. By the third paragraph, it finally printed Holt Brennan's full legal name. By midday, the incredible story of justice was picked up by the Associated Press, and by every major business news outlet across the East Coast. That same day, the Hartwell Register reprinted its old December 4, 2004 story on the front page. This time it featured a brief editor's note openly offering a formal apology for ignoring the corporate scandal back when it first broke. Some actions come too late. The editor, Owen Pratt, who was a junior reporter back then, wrote it himself. Slowly, quiet changes began to happen across Hartwell. On Monday afternoon, a retired electrician named Roy Tomlin walked up the gravel drive at 412 Linden Street. He left a warm, foil-wrapped apple pie on the porch with a folded note tucked underneath. Written in pencil, the note simply read, "I knew part of it. I am deeply sorry I stayed quiet. Roy," and he did not knock. By Tuesday, 3 more items sat on the porch, including peach preserves from a neighbor Holt couldn't even recall. There was also a warm casserole dish wrapped in a towel, and a handwritten card from a man who had worked the same line as Daniel. He moved to Ohio in 2007, carrying that heavy guilt with him every single year since. You and I recognize his true humble character. Holt went to the garage Monday morning, same as always. He loaded up the heavy air compressor he had, finished servicing on Saturday, delivering it right over to Margie's bakery on Main. Margie was a kind woman in her late 50s, flour dusting both of her forearms. I walked through the back door, carrying that heavy metal compressor. She put down her rolling pin, crossed the kitchen, and wrapped her loving arms around me. Without saying a single word, she held me, and I just let her. The young girl at the register tried her best to pretend she wasn't watching. Eleanor drove up to Hartwell that afternoon, parking across the street before walking slowly up my gravel driveway. I was out in the garage, tightening the final bolt on a neighbor's old tractor transmission. I felt her presence before even turning, quietly setting my wrench down on the workbench. We didn't speak for a long moment. She simply held out an envelope and I took it. Inside was a typed letter on Cole Holdings paper, officially signed by my Margaret as chief executive. This massive acquisition would close within 30 days, once the internal corporate investigation was finally completed. Every single non-financial clause would be fully honored. The newly renamed business would be called Vance Industries. A public statement restoring my name would go live on their website the day it closed, and it would clearly name me in the second paragraph. Mr. Holt Brennan was formally invited as the guest of honor to the press conference at their Philadelphia headquarters. I read those words twice. I folded the paper neatly into thirds and slipped it into my work shirt pocket. I looked back up at Eleanor and asked if she wanted to stay for coffee. She nodded and we sat on the porch in my two old wicker chairs. The late afternoon light filtered down low across the quiet maple trees. You and I know that silence speaks volumes. We watched steam rise from our mugs in the cool air. A neighbor across the street raised a hand from his mailbox. It wasn't a full wave, but it meant everything. I raised my hand in return. 3 weeks later, on a chilly Tuesday morning, the Vance lobby was completely transformed for the press. 60 reporters and 12 television cameras. A small wooden podium stood there, backed by a brand new logo on navy blue. This was the very same lobby I walked out of, clutching a cardboard box in the freezing rain back in 2004. I made the long drive down from Hartwell early that morning in my trusty Ford Ranger. The truck was ancient, its paint completely faded, but she still started on the very first try. I parked on a side street 4 blocks away. I really did not want to pull up with all those news cameras flashing. I walked those blocks slowly, hands shoved deep into my coat pockets. And I paused just once on the sidewalk across the street, needing to look at the headquarters from the outside before finally walking in. Catherine Lowell opened the press conference. She read the final conclusions of the independent investigation aloud. Richard Vance had officially submitted his resignation as chief executive and board chairman. The entire file had been forwarded directly to the Philadelphia County District Attorney, at the formal request of the United States Department of Labor. Listen, my old safety case from January 2005 was finally being reopened for review. The reading took exactly 9 minutes. The room was completely silent. Margaret stepped up, Ruth at her right shoulder, the greatest legacy of my life. Juniper stood proudly at her left. Margaret read her short, prepared statement. The buyout was officially complete. The acquired corporation would now officially become Vance Industries. Laying the legal papers down, she looked out over the quiet boardroom. I want to invite the man, she said, who made it possible for us to have any future at all, to join me. Holt stood up from the front, just a single father in a plain shirt, no jacket, no tie. He had only combed his hair once early that morning. He walked to the podium without rushing as the entire room grew still. A camera shutter clicked, then another, leaving nothing but deep, heavy silence. He carried no written speech with him. He paused, leaning into the microphone, and said slowly, "The day I brought 3 little girls home, I didn't know how to be a father. I just knew that if I didn't take them, nobody else would. Daniel Cole was my friend. I haven't done a single thing over these past 20 years expecting to ever be repaid. But if this merger means Daniel Cole's legacy is honored the right way, I will gladly accept that. For him, not me." Then he stepped back from the microphone. Look at what his love created. All 3 powerful women stood up together. They walked slowly up the center aisle, passing through the rows of seats. Reporters watched them embrace him in the lobby, as every single camera captured their shared bond. Holt raised his hand gently to place it on Juniper's hand. On her shoulder, a nearby camera caught the slight tremble in his worn hands. Of the 3 sisters, Juniper was the only one crying openly. Margaret kept her eyes closed tight, while Ruth leaned her hand against his back. Near the back, Eleanor Whitford stood by a cold marble pillar, her arms quietly crossed. Avoiding the cameras, she didn't interrupt. She simply watched the beautiful outcome of his devotion. By November, a pale light hung over Hartwell beneath a heavy gray autumn sky. Bright orange maple leaves were scattered all along the gravel driveway at 412 Linden Street. The air felt crisp and freezing, though the rain had not yet started to fall. "Stick with me here." Holt was working outside when that black sedan pulled up. Earlier that morning, he had removed the broken, rotted bottom step. He had cut fresh cedar in the yard and was busy hammering in the final nails with a heavy framing tool. That new cedar board stood out bright against the weathered gray of his old porch. Eleanor stepped right out of the car. Trading her corporate suit for a warm sweater and jeans, she balanced 2 paper coffee cups in her hand. She walked up the gravel path slowly, sitting down on the brand new cedar step. He had only just finished building it when she handed him a warm cup. They drank in peaceful silence while an old pickup truck rumbled by at the corner. A screen door slammed nearby. "I resigned from the big law firm last week," she admitted. "I just rented a small office space over on Walnut Street. I'm representing working folks now, helping people who can't afford giant firms. He just listened. "I want to name it Brennan Legal Aid," she told him, "if that is all right with you." He looked at her face for a quiet moment, then gave a single gentle nod. No words were needed. Just then a phone buzzed inside his faded shirt pocket. Pulling it out, he saw Maggie starting a video call with her two sisters. Maggie sat in a luxury car in downtown Chicago watching the gray city skyline roll past her window. Her new corporate branch would officially open its doors there next month. Ruth smiled from a bright new kitchen, showing off her first set of house keys with a little tag. She bought a home, proving that a little love given today becomes a legacy that changes tomorrow's generation. Picture my Juniper driving north on Interstate 95, phone propped up, just laughing so freely. She was heading over for our Sunday dinner, bringing a pie from Margie's Bakery. The call ended. I slipped my phone right back into my worn shirt pocket. I had not said much while we spoke. Honestly, I rarely do these days. I mostly just listened, asking one or two simple practical questions. I just wanted to ensure the three girls nobody else loved were eating well. That was our Sunday routine for 15 years. You and I know true legacy takes time to build. My front porch fell quiet once again. Just the gentle autumn wind pushing dry maple leaves along the edge of my lawn. And somewhere far off, a dog barked steadily before suddenly falling completely silent. Without even looking at Eleanor, I told her how 20 years ago, I walked out of that corporate office carrying a cardboard box. I never imagined a day would come when someone would sit out here with me on an afternoon quite this. Eleanor did not say a single word. She just tilted her head, watching the long line of yellow maples fading at the end of our street. Her hand rested gently against the brand new wood of the front step. My own hand rested on that same step only a few inches away from hers. Neither of us moved. The coffee in both of our mugs had gone almost cold. We had not said the word takeover out loud. Honestly, neither of us needed to.